All right, this is part 2 of rhythm and texture. We're going to talk about pattern and texture. All right, to get started, pattern is the repetition of a visual element or module in a regular and anticipated sequence. So in this photograph that we see on the right, we see this woman who's painting a little wall, and she's using these sort of black and white triangular patterns in this recurring and anticipated sequence. We also see that there's actually the pattern on her dress as well. So those black and white stripes are also repeated visual elements in an anticipated sequence. So pattern is really broad. It can be really simple, really complex. But there you go. All right, geometric pattern. So tessellation, which is also known as tiling. So that's when you have individual tiles, like think of your kitchen floor or maybe your bathroom. So those tiles is a pattern wherein there are no gaps or overlaps. So these are things that sort of fit together in these perfect little patterns and create these kind of like really ornate and geometric shapes, or sometimes simple shapes. Anyways, geometric pattern. Fractal. Fractal is a form of pattern and repetition wherein a pattern is repeated at different scales within a structure, revealing a similarity at different scales. So this is actually the underside of a dome at a tomb in Iran. And so when you see this piece, you actually look up at the ceiling and you see it, and there's this really complex set of patterns starting out from the middle and moving out from there. All right, similarities and differences between texture and pattern. So pattern is a repeating shapes or forms. Texture is something that you can actually feel on the surface, but these are examples where there are both. So in these kind of wood grain pieces on the top and then this burlap at the bottom, if you put your hand up to it, you would actually be able to feel the texture as you ran your fingers over the surface, but they also happen to have a repeating pattern. So with the wood, we see these kind of horizontal lines that are stacked on top of each other, and with the burlap, because of the way it's woven, there's actually kind of these squares that are repeating over and over again. So sometimes textures do have both, sometimes they don't, but this is a good example of where they kind of overlap. All right, we're going to talk about two different types of texture. So there's two categories of artistic texture, tactile and visual. So tactile texture is the use of materials to create a surface that can be felt or touched. So in this piece on the right called Progression, we can actually see that there's little tiny stones that are stacked on top of each other. And this is kind of a two-dimensional work because it's hanging on a wall, but it's actually three-dimensional because there's really rocks, and if you really put your hand up to it, you would be able to feel the surface and feel the texture that is being made. So first one, tactile texture. So this is another example of tactile texture. This is called This is an Untitled piece by Tom Friedman, and it's all wooden toothpicks that are placed together to make this kind of like exploding star in space, see an enemy thing. But I imagine if you put your hand out and tried to touch this, it would be very sharp, very spiky. So really a lot of texture that you can feel in that one. All right, this is the second type of texture. This is visual texture. So visual texture is a two-dimensional illusion suggestive of a tactile quality. So in this painting that we see by Vincent van Gogh, it looks like you could actually feel the clouds or the wind or his jacket or the hair on his face. But if you ran your hands over it, there might be a little bit of texture, but it's mostly just visual texture. That texture would be just from the paint, maybe on the surface a little bit, but really it would be very flat. So it looks like there is texture, but you cannot feel that texture. It just creates an illusion of it. All right, this is another example of visual texture with really a good example of verisimilitude. So verisimilitude is accuracy or faithfulness in depiction of representation. So in this piece called Rancho by Ed Ruscha, it looks to me like a hood of a car and someone has spilled maple syrup on it that reads Rancho. It just looks so like there is water droplets on that surface. It would be hard for me to believe that this is a really flat painting, especially looking at it on the internet, but it is. It's an incredibly flat painting. There is no texture, no raise to those words at all. It is really just the illusion that there is maple syrup or whatever on that surface. Okay, trompe-l'oeil. So this is a French term meaning to fool the eye. The objects are in sharp focus and delineated with meticulous care to create an artwork that almost fools the viewer into believing the images are the actual objects. So in this painting over here called Flower Still Life with Curtain, there's a story that goes along with this painting. The story is that there are two really wonderful artists who are both trompe-l'oeil painters, and they decide to do a competition to see who is the better trompe-l'oeil painter. The first artist brings out his piece, and it's a bowl of grapes, and it looks so real that birds fly down from the sky to try to peck it. Now, he's certain that he's won, and he goes to look at this painting, and he says, okay, can you pull back the curtain so I can see it? Realizing in the last moment that the curtain is not real, that actually is a painted curtain that's made to create this illusion that it's real. So I don't know. I would love to see this painting in person because that curtain just is unbelievably real looking. I can't believe that it's not there. So trompe-l'oeil painting, so real it fools your eye. So this is a trompe-l'oeil sculpture. So this is called Amanita Field by Roxy Payne, and he makes these kind of like hyper-realistic sculptures. So these are a type of mushrooms that apparently is the most deadly species of mushrooms. So I actually saw this this sculpture in real life, and the first time I saw it, it was one of the first pieces I saw in this museum, and I just walked right past it and said, I don't know what those mushrooms are doing there. And by the time I had come all the way back around, I realized that they were not real mushrooms, that they were sculptures, and was like, what is going on? So I kind of almost ignored them. They looked too real. I just didn't know what it was all about. So real looking, it fools you into believing. All right, so we are going to be making some trompe-l'oeil sculptures in a moment, or you're going to be reading about how you're going to be making some. And so that example of the mushrooms is a really intense example of a trompe-l'oeil sculpture. But here's kind of another example. So this is a piece that we've actually looked at before called After the Fire is Gone by Kate Giordano. And so this has a really great example of verisimilitude. So not exactly a trompe-l'oeil sculpture, not so real looking that we believe that these are real people and that's a real plate of chicken and potato and peas and carrots, but accuracy and faithfulness to the depiction of what that scene would actually look like. So the plate is the size of the plate, the cups are the size of the cup. This woman is really as tall as she would be. You can walk through this space and everything is almost as it should be. Not quite, but there is an accuracy and faithfulness to the depiction. So this is between the two of those really realistic mushrooms, and then these kind of not as realistic, but really kind of close to the representation of what things would be. You can get a good example of what a trompe-l'oeil sculpture would be. So think about verisimilitude, try to stay faithful to the object, and try to create it as real as possible, but nothing can be perfect ever.